Star Trek, Primitive Passenger Season 6, Episodes 9 and 10. Cataclysm. The stars outside the view screen elongated and snapped back as the Havoc arrived at mining outpost Sigma-7. The scene that greeted them was one of devastation. The once bustling facility now drifted in pieces, debris scattered across a wide area of space. "Life signs?" Nolan asked, his voice tight. "Detecting faint life signs among the debris," Ilara replied, her tone somber. "No more than a dozen survivors, Nolan." Nolan's jaw clenched. "Begin rescue operations. Have the drones collect the survivors and get them back to the station for medical treatment." In a quieter tone, "Have those we lost delivered to Horizon for detail." As the drones set to work, Nolan scrutinized the wreckage. Ilara analyzed the attack pattern. "I want to know who did this and why, and deploy sentry drones to the surrounding sectors. I want eyes everywhere." Minutes ticked by as Ilara processed the data. Nolan paced the bridge, his unease growing with each passing moment. The voice of one of his security officers came over the comm. "Sir? Do you copy?" "This is Mercer. Go ahead." "Sir, it's Damien Santa Fe. We've begun preliminary damage assessments." Nolan stopped him. "Don't sweat that right now. Make sure your team get out of the area." He paused for a moment. "Consider this an active battle zone. If you're not geared for war, go home. Evacuate the whole camp." "Will do, sir. Any idea who's behind this?" he naturally inquired. "We're working on it, Santa Fe." And the discussion was over. Finally, Ilara spoke. "Nolan, I've completed my analysis of the warp signatures and weapons residue." There was a pause, almost as if the AI was hesitating. "It's Gorn." The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. Before Nolan could respond, an alert blared through the bridge. "Nolan," Ilara's voice was urgent now, "we're receiving another distress call. It's from Daybreak Colony." Nolan felt a chill run down his spine. Daybreak was one of their largest working settlements, home to thousands of Neos. If it was under attack, put it through, he ordered, bracing himself for what was to come. Be prepared to move. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a scene of chaos. Smoke filled the air, alarms blared in the background, and the face of the colony's young governor was streaked with blood and terror. Nolan circled his hand in the air. Ilara made the blink, weapons hot. "This is Governor Terran of Daybreak Lunar Colony." The man's voice crackled through the speakers. "We are under heavy attack by Gorn forces. They've breached our defenses. They're taking our people, killing us. Please, we need immediate access." An explosion rocked Daybreak's command center. "Help, me?" Nolan's hands hammered the holographic console. White shards lanced out from the Havoc, shredding Gorn ships. "Ilara, blink in every available ship and drone in the sector. I want our entire fleet converging on Daybreak immediately." The Gorn had made a grave mistake, and they were about to learn the true meaning of retribution. The space around the colony was thick with Gorn vessels, their organic forms a stark contrast to the sleek lines of Nolan's fleet. "Open fire," Nolan commanded, his voice cold and precise. The response was immediate and devastating. Beams of energy lanced out from the Havoc and its accompanying ships, tearing through the Gorn fleet. Hundreds of enemy vessels erupted into balls of flame, their destruction silent in the vacuum of space. In mere minutes, the skies above Daybreak were clear of Gorn ships, but the victory felt hollow as reports began flooding in from the surface. "Nolan," Ilara's voice was uncharacteristically subdued, "I'm receiving casualty reports from Daybreak. It's bad." Nolan's face hardened as he absorbed the horrific details. Thousands dead, thousands more taken, and countless others infected with Gorn eggs. The colony, once a thriving hub of Neo activity, was now a scene of unspeakable carnage. "Patch me through to Starfleet Command," Nolan ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Captain Sisko's face appeared on the view screen, his expression tense. "Mr. Mercer, what's going on?" "Your call came through as an emergency." "Captain, we've been hit hard at Daybreak Lunar Colony," Nolan said, his voice tight. "Gorn." Sisko turned an ashen gray, his expression grave. "Mr. Mercer, you have my deepest sympathies." "I don't need sympathy, Captain. I need ships, troops, support," Nolan replied, his voice barely containing his fury. Sisko's response was measured, diplomatic. "I understand your position, Mr. Mercer, and I'll speak immediately with Starfleet Command, but the Federation is still recovering from the Dominion War. I doubt we have the resources to spare for a conflict with the Gorn." Nolan's jaw clenched, but he nodded curtly. "I'll remember that. Thank you for your time, Captain." As Sisko's image faded, Nolan immediately opened a channel to the Klingon High Council. Chancellor Martok's gruff visage filled the screen. "Mercer, it's been too long," Martok boomed, but his smile faded as he took in Nolan's expression. "Chancellor, I need the Empire's help. The Gorn have attacked my people," Nolan stated bluntly. Martok's face fell. Mercer, you know I would love nothing more than to spill Gorn blood by your side. But the High Council is battle-worn. They don't have the stomach to engage in another war so soon after the last. We will, however, move ships to our borders with Gorn space. We will not allow this conflict to spill into Klingon territory." Nolan's hope dwindled further. His attempts to contact the Romulan Star Empire were met with silence, not even a courtesy response. As the final communication ended, Nolan stood motionless on the bridge, his people suffering upon his shoulders. His eyes swept across the various displays showing the devastation on Daybreak, each image fueling the rage building within him. With deliberate movements, Nolan tapped at his console. A section of the bridge floor began to rise, revealing a sleek, ominous pod, the command chamber he hadn't used since the Mestat Wars. Nolan tilted his head to one side, feeling the tension release with a grinding crack that echoed against the walls. Nolan and Alara stood before the command pod, their reflections distorted in its sleek surface. Alara trembled slightly as she sorted a bundle of golden electric leads, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and dread. "Nolan," she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I don't know if you realize. When you commanded the Enkanite Armada you were... It's just that... Alara, what is it? We've known each other 400 years. To say it." Alara turned away, unable to meet his gaze. You were ruthless, Nolan. Your thoughts conveyed instantly to the fleet. They were deadly under your command. It's why the Enkanite wanted you." Nolan opened his mouth and flexed his jaw, pressing against his left masseter, sore from the constant tightness. "I've come to understand what I really am, Alara. The prophets made damn sure of that. The Gorn, however, have yet to learn. It's just, Nolan," as she turned back to him, her hands full of wires, "will you kill all of them?" "If I can," Nolan replied, his eyes fixed on the command pod. "Will you be able to stop, Nolan?" Alara pressed. "Once the Gorn are gone, can you stop?" Nolan's gaze hardened. "You mean, will our so-called friends at Starfleet and on Konos be safe from my wrath? Will I forgive them their cowardice, their betrayal, their failure to stand by an ally?" A heavy silence fell between them. Nolan's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Will they get the full and glorious Mestat treatment?" He turned back to the pod. "Maybe this thing will pute me out in 80 years, after the Alpha Quadrant has been properly cleansed of humanoids." Alara couldn't look him in the eye as they continued to prepare the pod, attaching fine gold wires and thick black tubes. "I guess we'll have to wait and see," he finished. A short time later, Nolan emerged from his quarters onto the bridge, his hair wet, body bare. His feet slapped against the metal deck as he approached the pod where Alara stood ready. She looked at him worriedly. He smiled reassuringly, but his voice betrayed his apprehension. "This is what they built me for, right?" His tone dropped. "Can I even imagine how much this is going to hurt?" "No." lay in the pod, cables and wires coiling around him like mechanical serpents. Ilara looped the fine golden wires through the top of the pod, the tear falling from her eye onto Nolan's face. He didn't notice as he began to react to the pain as fine wires began to push their way through his flesh to connect to his nervous system. Legs, arms, body, the tiny golden wires attached to every nerve ending. Suddenly, the golden wires around his head spread wide, then shot into his skull, connecting directly to his brain. Simultaneously, tubes and cables forced their way down his throat. A silent scream as Nolan's body lifts and contorts in agony. Gasping for breath as he desperately tries to force his breath around the tubes, eyes wild. Nolan is falling in blackness, feeling nothing but pain. Then nothing but nothing. A fire. A massive bright spark erupted as Nolan's brain fully connected. Then darkness once more. Now, in the void of his consciousness, Nolan felt himself expanding, reaching out across vast distances of space. His mind ignited like a supernova, awareness spreading at faster-than-light speeds to every corner of the galaxy. Deep within moons and asteroids, hidden in nebulae and dark matter clouds, dormant drones began to stir. In the Gamma Quadrant, swarms of mechanical sentinels awoke from their slumber. Across the Delta Quadrant, massive four-prong weapons platforms hummed to life. Even in the farthest reaches of the Beta Quadrant, isolated units responded to their master's call. Nolan's consciousness touched each of the 250,000 drones simultaneously. He felt their systems as extensions of his own body. Weapons became limbs. Sensors transformed into hyperacute senses. The vast network of machines pulsed with his will, ready to unleash devastation on an unprecedented scale. His mind raced at impossible speeds, processing data from millions of sensors, formulating strategies, and coordinating movements with inhuman precision. It was a symphony of destruction waiting to be conducted, and Nolan was the maestro. The sensation was familiar yet foreign, a power he hadn't wielded since the annihilation of the Mestat Alliance nearly 2 centuries ago. But now that power had grown exponentially. Where once he commanded thousands of great ships, now he controlled hundreds of thousands. The sheer scale of his influence was intoxicating. In his mind's eye, Nolan saw the galaxy laid out before him like a 3-dimensional chessboard. Gorn territories glowed like malignant tumors, ripe for excision. His armada, previously scattered across the cosmos, now converged with singular purpose. Without a word, without a sound, Nolan's will rippled through his vast network. Drones blinked from their hidden lairs, weapons platforms vanished en masse, and ships blinked into formation. From the Gamma Quadrant to the Delta, from the outer rim of the galaxy to its very core, Nolan's forces mobilized for war. On the bridge of the Havoc, Ilara watched in awe and trepidation as the galactic map came alive with movement. Streams of data poured in from every sector, painting a picture of an armada unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Nolan's body lay motionless in the command pod, but his mind soared through the stars, bringing with it the promise of retribution. The Gorn had awakened a sleeping giant, and now the entire galaxy would bear witness to the consequences of their actions. As the first wave of drones reached the outskirts of Gorn space, Nolan's campaign of vengeance began in earnest. Silent, implacable, and utterly ruthless, the primitive was unleashed once more upon an unsuspecting galaxy. As Nolan's consciousness spread across his vast network of drones, Ilara's form on the Havoc's bridge sat perfectly still. Her eyes, once expressive, now stared blankly as she devoted more and more of her processing power to managing the countless blink jumps required for Nolan's assault. The attack began at the fringes of Gorn space. On the mining colony of Zex-Kar, Gorn workers looked up in horror as the sky flashed with the arrival of thousands of drones. In an instant, the colony's defenses were overwhelmed. Massive explosions rocked the planetoid's surface as key facilities were reduced to rubble. Without pause, the drones blinked to their next target. The agricultural world of Sisek found itself under siege. Vast fields of Gorn crops were incinerated in seconds, while storage silos exploded, their contents scattered to the winds. The planet's small defensive fleet was torn apart, their ships reduced to drifting debris. In all cases, no Gorn remained on the ground or tumbling in space. The Jem'Hadar protocol pouring Gorn of all ages and stages into the stars. As news of the attack spread, the Gorn military scrambled to respond, but Nolan's assault was relentless, his drones appearing and disappearing faster than the Gorn could track. The shipyards orbiting Gornath, a gas giant on the edge of their territory, were the next to fall. Uncompleted Gorn vessels were torn apart by precision strikes, while completed ships found themselves swarmed by Nolan's drones before they could even power up their weapons. The Havoc sat neatly between a red dwarf and a white giant, its ever-black hull absorbing energy to power Alara's processors as she burned through the calculations needed to keep a couple 100,000 drones in endless feathering patterns. Nolan hadn't put her through her paces like this in a very long while. The assault moved deeper into Gorn space. The fortress moon of Kasith, long thought impregnable, was reduced to rubble in a matter of hours. Nolan's drones bored into its core, detonating its reactors and shattering the moon from within. As the outer defenses crumbled, Nolan turned his attention to the Gorn's inner territories. The breeding world of Hissistar, home to millions of Gorn, became a hellscape of fire and destruction. Massive hatcheries were vaporized. An entire generation of Gorn wiped out in an instant. The space station Gornzar, a hub of military activity, found itself surrounded. In a coordinated attack, Nolan's drones systematically destroyed its weapon emplacements, life support systems, and power cores. The station, once a symbol of Gorn might, was left as a lifeless cloud of debris expanding in space. Planet after planet fell. The Arctic research base on Frozen Scale was melted to its core. The subterranean cities of Deepness were collapsed, burying millions. The floating cities of Gasworld were sent plummeting into the planet's crushing depths. As the attack neared the Gorn core worlds, the scale of destruction grew exponentially. The shipyard planet of Klath, responsible for producing the majority of the Gorn fleet, was turned into a graveyard of half-built ships and shattered dreams. The Gorn's last line of defense, a massive fleet gathered around their homeworld, prepared for a final stand. But Nolan's drones, now somewhat reduced in numbers to only 190,000, swarmed them from all sides. Capital ships were torn apart, their crews helpless against the onslaught. Throughout it all, Nolan remained silent in his pod, his mind a whirlwind of tactical calculations and strategic maneuvers. Ilara, now little more than a living computer, continued to manage the countless blink jumps that made this assault possible. As the drones approached the Gorn homeworld, a desperate transmission was broadcast across all frequencies. The voice of the Gorn leadership, once proud and defiant, now trembled with fear. "Please," the transmission began. "We beg for mercy. We surrender unconditionally. Spare our people, our world. We will submit to any demands. Please, stop this slaughter." The plea echoed through space, reaching the Havoc and Nolan's vast network of drones. Starfleet and all the factions were listening as well. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if the primitive would show mercy, or if his vengeance would be complete. As Nolan's assault on the Gorn homeworld loomed, the galaxy erupted into chaos. Starfleet, finally grasping the full extent of Nolan's vengeance, broke their silence. Admiral Jellicoe's face appeared on screens across the sector, his expression a mix of anger and fear. "Mercer, this is a direct order from Starfleet Command. Cease your attack immediately. You've made your point. Any further aggression will be met with the full force of the Federation." Even as the Admiral spoke, Starfleet vessels began to move into position along the borders of Gorn space and Nolan's territory. The threat was clear, but Nolan's response was swift and silent. Thousands of drones blinked into existence along the same borders, forming an impenetrable wall of potential destruction. The message was clear. Any incursion would be met with immediate and devastating retaliation. Simultaneously, similar drone formations appeared along Nolan's borders with Romulan and Klingon space. Trust, it seemed, was a luxury Nolan could no longer afford. Amidst this tense standoff, a ragtag fleet of Cardassian and Dominion ships suddenly burst through the Starfleet blockade. Their unexpected arrival caught everyone off guard. Before Nolan could redirect his drones, the Cardassians engaged Gorn outposts along the border with a fervor that shocked even hardened veterans. Cardassian disruptors tore through Gorn defenses, while their torpedoes found their marks with unerring accuracy. But it was their attack on the fleeing Gorn civilian ships that truly demonstrated their commitment. Massive passenger vessels, packed with those desperately trying to escape Nolan's wrath, were cut down without mercy. As the Cardassians carved a bloody path through Gorn space, Nolan's focus remained fixed on the Gorn homeworld. The pleas for mercy continued to echo across all frequencies. Please, Mercer, we surrender. We'll do anything, give you anything. Just spare our people, our world. On Starfleet ships, on Klingon bridges, and in the halls of the Romulan Senate, the desperate cries of the Gorn leadership were heard. Many listened in horror, some in grim satisfaction, but all knew they were witnessing a turning point in galactic history. Nolan's response came not in words, but in actions. His drones blinked into a pattern surrounding the Gorn homeworld. They struck not at military targets or government installations, but at the very core of the planet itself. Massive energy beams lanced deep into the planet's crust, triggering tectonic instabilities. Fissures began to appear on the surface, spreading like spiderwebs across continents. The planet's core, destabilized by the relentless assault, began to collapse in on itself. In orbit, Gorn and non-Gorn alike watched in horror as the planet began to break apart. Billions of voices cried out in terror, their screams silenced as chunks of their world broke away, and its atmosphere boiled. The drones blinked out in quick flashes of white light. The destruction was methodical, precise, and utterly complete. Where once stood a thriving world, now drifted only debris and the quieted souls of a civilization. As the last echoes of the Gorn homeworld's destruction faded, a chilling silence fell across the sector. Nolan's vengeance was complete, but the consequences of his actions were only beginning to unfold. On the bridge of the Havoc, Alara shook herself back into full coherence, the demands of coordinating blink jumps finally lessening. Her eyes, no longer blank with an inhuman stare, now reflected a mixture of awe and horror at what had transpired. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what the primitive would do next. The Gorn were broken, but the powers that had failed Nolan in his hour of need still stood. The question on everyone's mind was, would Nolan's wrath be satisfied? Or was this just the beginning? An unexpected transmission from Legate Nardek cut through the tense silence that had fallen in the wake of the Gorn homeworld's destruction. His voice, calm and assured, echoed across all channels. "Greetings, Mr. Mercer. I'm Legate Nardek. The Cardassian Provisional Government wants to assure you that you can trust Cardassia. We don't abandon those who stand beside us in battle and those who help us survive the aftermath of war." As Starfleet and Klingon ships watched from their positions, Nardek continued, his tone dripping with disdain. "I'm simply shocked that our Klingon and Federation friends have so little backbone and refuse to join the fray, cowering in the safe confines you fought so hard to secure for them." Chancellor Martok's gruff voice cut in, bristling with indignation. "Nardek, you risk diplomatic sanctions for such talk." Nardek's response was swift and cutting. "Oh my, really, Chancellor? Diplomatic sanctions, that's the best you have to offer. Why, the Klingon Empire used to be a thing to be feared. I guess the Jim Hadar must have taken more than just your ships in battle," hilariously making scissor motions with his fingers to indicate, well, you know. Lucky thing Nolan Mercer poured them all into the sun, don't you think? What else might they have taken? Martok's enraged roars filled the comm channels briefly before Nardek cut his feed. In the wake of this exchange, the political landscape shifted dramatically. Starfleet's demands for Nolan to cease his attack faltered, their resolve wavering in the face of Cardassian support and their own exposed hypocrisy. Martok, stung by Nardek's words and perhaps secretly ashamed of the Empire's inaction, made a surprising move. Klingon ships began to patrol the borders of Gorn space, engaging and destroying any Gorn vessels they encountered in outlying areas. The Romulans maintained their silence, but observant sensors noted that Gorn outposts along Romulan borders mysteriously ceased. Meanwhile, the Cardassian fleet, though small, continued to punch above its weight. Alongside Nolan's drones, they pursued Gorn ships relentlessly, destroying outposts and colonies with ruthless efficiency. Their goal was clear: to hunt the Gorn to extinction. On the bridge of the Havoc, Alara's form exhausted in the captain's chair as she processed the rapidly changing situation. "Nolan," she spoke softly, hoping her words would reach him in the command pod, "the Cardassians' support has shifted the balance. The Federation and Klingons are backing down." In the command pod, Nolan Mercer remained silent, his consciousness spread across his vast network of drones. His mind, consumed by rage and the desire for vengeance, continued to direct the relentless assault on the Gorn. Days had passed since the destruction of the Gorn homeworld, yet Nolan's fury showed no signs of abating. His drones, tireless and precise, hunted down every Gorn ship, outpost, and colony they could find. The devastation was total, methodical, and without mercy. Alara monitored Nolan's vital signs with growing concern. His body, pushed to its limits by the neural interface, showed signs of extreme stress. Yet there was no indication that Nolan was ready to disengage from the pod. As Cardassian ships continued their support, picking off Gorn stragglers and destroying hidden enclaves, Nolan's focus remained singular: the complete eradication of the Gorn species. His rage, far from being sated by the destruction of their homeworld, seemed to have found new depths. Reports flooded in from across the quadrant. Gorn mining colony on Astaroth IV obliterated. Gorn research station in the Valorum sector vaporized. Last known Gorn breeding facility in the Cetus Arm destroyed. With each report, Nolan's drones moved on to the next target, leaving only destruction in their wake. The Gorn, once a feared power in the quadrant, were all but systematically wiped from existence. The Federation, Klingons, and Romulans watched from the sidelines, their earlier bravado replaced by a mix of awe and fear. They had underestimated both Nolan's capability and his wrath, and now they could only observe as he reshaped the quadrant through sheer force of will. Inside the pod, Nolan's consciousness roared with each victory, each Gorn life extinguished. This wasn't about politics or power dynamics. This was personal, a primal scream of vengeance given form through his vast armada. As the hunt continued, Alara's voice echoed through the Havoc systems, though it was unclear if Nolan could hear or comprehend in his current state. "Nolan, it's been days. The Gorn are all but extinct. How much longer will this continue?" But in the pod there was only silence, broken by the occasional spark of neural activity as Nolan directed his forces to yet another target. The primitive's wrath was far from spent, and the galaxy could only watch and wait to see where it would lead. Days of relentless destruction had led to this moment. Nolan's consciousness, once spread over his entire drone network, now converged on the last known Gorn breeding colony. Intelligence suggested this was where the remnants of the Gorn fleet had made their final stand. As Nolan's drones approached, they encountered fierce resistance. The remaining Gorn ships fought with the desperation of a species facing extinction. Despite their valor, they were no match for the sheer numbers and ruthless efficiency of Nolan's armada. The battle raged across the system, Gorn ships exploded in silent balls of fire, their debris joining the expanding field of destruction. On the planet's surface, Nolan's drones systematically destroyed hatcheries and habitation domes. Millions of Gorn lives were extinguished in a matter of hours. As the last Gorn ship fell silent, Nolan's drones prepared to deliver the final blow to the planet itself. But at that moment, a new fleet dropped out of warp. Klingon battlecruisers, their weapons charged, moved to intercept Nolan's forces. They had come to claim the glory of finishing off the Gorn, unaware of the full extent of Nolan's rage. In his pod, Nolan's mind registered the new threat. Without hesitation, his drones began to reposition, targeting the Klingon ships. The first salvos were fired, Klingon shields flaring under the assault. But as Nolan prepared to obliterate the Klingon fleet, a spark of recognition cut through his rage-filled haze. These weren't Gorn. These were Klingons, allies, however unreliable. For the first time in days, Nolan's single-minded focus wavered. In that moment of hesitation, he became aware of other presences at the edge of the system. Romulan warbirds decloaked, their stance unclear but certainly wary. The realization hit Nolan like a physical blow. He had been moments away from potentially starting a war with major powers of the Alpha Quadrant. The consequences of such an action flooded his mind, breaking through the wall of rage that had driven him for days. With a mental command that felt like tearing himself apart, Nolan ordered his drones to stand down. The sudden cessation of hostilities left an eerie quiet in its wake. The silence of space seemed to press in on Nolan's consciousness, the absence of constant battle commands leaving a void that threatened to consume him. In that moment of clarity, the full weight of his actions crashed down upon him. Billions dead, entire worlds reduced to rubble, all by his whim. His mind, so accustomed to the frenetic pace of warfare, now reeled in the sudden stillness. Fragments of memories flashed before him, the terror in Gorn eyes as their worlds crumbled, the silent screams of those sucked into the vacuum of space, the relentless march of his drones across once thriving colonies. Nolan's heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The line between justice and genocide, so clear in his rage-fueled campaign, now blurred into an indistinguishable haze of moral ambiguity. As the enormity of his actions settled in, Nolan felt a primal urge to escape, to flee from the monster he had become. His consciousness, spread across millions of drones and ships, began to contract violently, retreating from the vast network he had commanded with such deadly precision. The withdrawal was not gentle. Each severed connection felt like a physical blow, sending shockwaves of pain through his psyche. The virtual synapses that had linked him to his armada now fired randomly, overloading his senses with a cacophony of disconnected data and half-formed commands. Nolan's mind screamed for release, for an end to the torment of disengagement. But even as he fought to break free, a part of him clung desperately to the pod, to the power it represented. The conflict tore at his very being, threatening to rip his consciousness apart. In the command pod aboard the Havoc, Nolan's body convulsed. The neural interface, sensing the abrupt change in his mental state, began to physically disengage. Pain lanced through every nerve as the connections were severed. Nolan Mercer's eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. Slowly he forces a long, gurgling exhale around the thick black tubes protruding from his mouth and nose. Now more intense. Another sharp inhale rattled in his chest as awareness flooded back. His hands tore away from the wires and tubes that seemed to come from his entire body. His hands breaking free, he wildly clawed at the tubes in his nose and mouth. Another sharp inhale, and the tubes begin to slide out of his nose and mouth as he forces the exhale. Unable to breathe, thrashing desperately against his constraints and the small pod that enclosed him, the structure, unable to withstand the onslaught, burst open with a hiss of escaping steam. Fingers scrabbled at the wires and tubes, tearing them away with desperate energy. Nolan gagged and coughed as he pulled the invasive apparatus from his body. The tubes seemed endless, sliding out of his nose, his mouth, his lungs, his stomach. Each tud brought a fresh wave of panic, manifested in increasingly frantic inhales that scraped against his raw throat. As the last tube slithered free, Nolan's coughing intensified. His body convulsed, trying to expel whatever foreign substances remained in his system. But the panic had taken hold, and there was no time for relief. Nolan tumbled out of the pod, his pale, naked body hitting the cold floor with a thud. For a moment, he lay there, shivering and gasping. He tried to lift his head and raise his body onto his hands. Overcome by the shock and strain, Nolan's eyelids fluttered as his eyes rolled back. He slipped into unconsciousness. He lay there, pale and gaunt, his body racked with tremors. The physical toll of days spent in the pod was evident in his sunken cheeks and protruding ribs. Ilara approached him, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "Nolan," she said softly, "it's over. You're back." As Nolan struggled to regain control of his body, his mind reeled from the aftermath of his actions. The full weight of what he had done, and what he had nearly done, began to settle on him. The Gorn were gone, their space now a vast, empty frontier between the Klingon and Romulan empires. With a hoarse whisper, Nolan gave his first verbal command in days. "Get us out of here. Send the drones back home." As the Havoc prepared to jump, Nolan closed his eyes, exhaustion overtaking him. "Come, Nolan," Ilara said softly. "It's over, but we need to act quickly. The Klingons and Romulans are already positioning their fleets." With effort, Nolan pushed himself up, his gaunt frame a testament to the days spent in the neural interface. "No," he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. "They don't get to profit from this. Ilara, send out the claim." Understanding immediately, Ilara nodded. A transmission burst forth from the Havoc, broadcasting across all frequencies. "By right of conquest, Nolan Mercer claims all former Gorn territories. Any incursion will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. Klingon and Romulan ships, poised to carve up the newly vacant space, hesitated. The memory of Nolan's devastating campaign was fresh in their minds, and none were eager to test his resolve. As the tense standoff continued, Nolan stumbled to his feet. "Ilara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to oversee things here. Go to Empire North. Make sure our borders are secure." Ilara just stared. "And you, Nolan? Where will you go?" "I need time, space." His eyes, haunted by the horrors he'd both witnessed and caused, met hers. "You know where I'll be." Understanding dawned on Ilara's face. "The Expanse," she said softly. "Nolan, are you sure? In your condition." But Nolan's mind was made up. With trembling hands, he inputted a series of commands into the ship's computer. "The fleet is yours to command, Ilara. Protect our people. Protect what we've built." Before Ilara could protest further, her form shimmered and vanished, transported to a small, nondescript ship docked within the Havoc. Nolan watched on the view screen as the tiny vessel detached and, in a flash, blinked out of existence. He knew where it was headed. Back home, back to Empot Nor. As the Havoc prepared to jump, Ilara wondered when, or if, she would see Nolan again. In the darkness of space, the dreadship, Havoc, reappeared in the heart of the Necrit Expanse. As he drifted in the void, surrounded by nothing but distant nothing, Nolan closed his eyes. The weight of his actions, the lives he'd taken, the power he'd wielded, it all needed sorted. It all needed to find its place. Here, in the emptiness of space, the man known as the Primitive began the long process of confronting what he had become, and the galaxy, forever changed by his wrath, held its breath, wondering if he would emerge from this self-imposed exile. In the aftermath of the Gorn campaign, Ilara found herself at the helm of an empire, in mourning. From her command center on Empire North, she oversaw the massive task of recalling and repairing the fleet while maintaining a vigilant defense of their newly expanded territories. Swarms of drones blinked in and out along the borders, a silent reminder of the devastation they had wrought, and a warning to any who might consider encroaching on Mercer's claim. Meanwhile, deep in asteroid fields and on distant moons, hangars slowly filled as ships and drones returned to their secret berths, awaiting the next call to arms. Kenta. The Neos, despite their youth and accelerated development, struggled to process the scale of destruction they had witnessed. Many threw themselves into reconstruction efforts, finding solace in the tangible act of rebuilding. Others sought comfort in community, gathering in the evenings to share stories and support one another. Periodically, a Neo would approach Ilara, their eyes filled with a mixture of concern and hope. "Is he okay?" they would ask, or "Is he coming back?" Each time, Ilara would offer a reassuring smile, even as uncertainty gnawed at her own consciousness. "Nolan needs time," she would say, her voice gentle but firm. "He'll return when he's ready." But as days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, even Ilara found herself wondering about the truth of her words. The bond she shared with Nolan, forged over centuries, felt stretched thin by distance and silence. One evening, as Ilara monitored the reconstruction efforts on Daybreak Colony, she received an urgent communication. A group of Neo-leaders, including Buff, requested her presence for an important discussion. Curious, Ilara manifested her holographic form in the meeting room. The Neos, their faces a mixture of determination and nervousness, gathered around her. Buff, his eyes reflecting a maturity beyond his years, spoke first. "Ilara, we've been talking among ourselves, and we have a request." A young woman named Lori stepped forward. "We want to contact Nolan," she said, her voice steady despite the audacity of the request. Ilara's form flickered slightly, betraying her surprise. "I'm not sure that's wise," she began, but Buff cut her off. "We are self-governing, aren't we?" he asked. "Free to make our own decisions." Another Neo, Tom, joined in. "We want to show Nolan that we're with him. We don't care about his so-called sins. He gave everything for us, sacrificed so much." Lori nodded emphatically. "He's family, and family doesn't abandon each other, no matter what." Ilara looked at each of them in turn, seeing the resolve in their eyes. These weren't the naive children Nolan had first created. They had grown, shaped by adversity, and united by their shared experiences. "You understand the risks?" Ilara asked, her voice soft. "Nolan left for a reason. He might not want to be found." Buff stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "We understand. But we also know that sometimes even the strongest among us need to be reminded that they're not alone. Nolan taught us about loyalty, about standing by those who stand by us. It's time we showed him we learned that lesson well." Ilara's holographic form seemed to sigh, a very human gesture for an AI. "I can't guarantee he'll respond," she warned, "but I'll help you try to reach him." As she listened to the Neos exchange excited ideas, Ilara allowed herself to imagine Nolan's return and the healing it might bring to them all. Musturtle, Nolan Mercer, stood alone on the bridge of the havoc, gazing into the void of the Necrit expanse. The vast emptiness mirrored the turmoil within him. He had entered the command pod knowing what at least part of the outcome would be. He did wonder if it would simply spit him out 180 years later, after he'd extinguished all life in the Alpha Quadrant, but was okay if that's where it decided to take him. His rage, after losing so many of his own, had abated. The loss still wore on him, but evaporating 9 billion Gorn had taken the sting out of it. His revenge satiated. This was not what Nolan wanted to be, yet he could make himself feel no sadness or regret in his actions. While other conflicts left him awash in guilt, he just couldn't make himself shed a tear for the Gorn. Months had passed since he retreated to this desolate region of space, seeking solace once again in its vast emptiness. With his revenge complete, what was left? What would define him when there was no enemy to fight? The thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Taking a deep breath, he began to turn away when a faint glimmer caught his eye. He turned back, squinting into the darkness. A ship blinked into existence. a dilithium refiner. Nolan checked his display panel. Then another ship appeared, a small cargo hauler blinking in nearer the Havoc. Nolan's brow furrowed in confusion as more and more ships began to materialize around him. A frigate, 4 more varied ships, and then a dozen more. The space around his ship filled with an ever-growing fleet of vessels. "What the—" Nolan whispered, disbelief turning to astonishment as he watched the procession of ships. Mining ships, passenger ships, military ships, even individuals arriving in drones. The sight was overwhelming. An ocean of ships twinkling into the expanse around him. Before Nolan could process what was happening, Laurie's voice broke through. "We're with you, sir." Nolan looked out at the myriad of ships, each a testament to the varied lives that had rallied around him. Emotions welled up, but he held them back. "I don't know what to say." He paused, then added, "Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, I've forwarded coordinates. Jump with me." Nolan shared the coordinates, and in a cascade of light, thousands of ships vanished from the expanse, returning the void to its undisturbed stillness. The ring world came into view, a colossal structure encircling a sun. Hundreds of ships blinked into existence near one section, a smattering of mismatched, randomly parked ships. The vast landscape below was dotted with lush greenery, sprawling meadows, and serene bodies of water. On the surface, hundreds of Nolan's Neos, non-Earth origin humans, gathered around large buffet tables outdoors as every day was beautiful and sunny on the ring. The tables were heaped with all sorts of ring-world fruits and vegetables, various roast beasts on serving platters. People milled around in various clothing uniforms, clothes worn by miners, farmers, and individuals from varied professions within Nolan's empire. The atmosphere was festive, resembling a massive family reunion. More ships blinked into the surrounding space, and more Neos transported to the surface, adding to the gathering's vibrancy. Nolan beamed out of the Havoc and took in the sight before him. The air was filled with laughter, chatter, and the smell of delicious food. It was a stark contrast to the cold emptiness of the Necrit expanse. A group of young children ran past him, playing a game of tag. Nolan watched them with a soft smile, feeling a warmth in his chest. These are the young offspring of the first new humans he created years ago. His people were fruitful and multiplying. He walked toward the gathering, greeted by nods and smiles from his people, like part of their extended family, catching a quick hug or handshake as he passed. Approaching one of the buffet tables, a woman handed him a plate with a smile. "Good to see you, sir." "Good to be here," Nolan replied, nodding. He filled his plate with an assortment of foods, the vibrant colors and rich aromas awakening his senses. He found a spot at a table among his people, joining in their conversation and laughter. As the sun began to hide behind the massive day-night panel above them, casting a golden glow over their little part of the ring world, Nolan looked around at the faces of those who had stood by him. He felt a profound sense of gratitude and determination. This was his family now, and he would do everything in his power to protect them and lead them to a brighter future. As night fell, the ring world's stationary panels created the illusion of twilight. The festivities continued around large bonfires, with music and dancing filling the air. The massive Havoc stood grounded on the surface, a beacon of safety and unity. Its holographic systems had transformed its interior into a welcoming haven, with hotel-like rooms, central meeting areas, small cafes, and other public spaces. As the evening waned, people began transporting into the Havoc, picking rooms to sleep in. The camaraderie and joy of the night lingered in the air. Nolan, standing on the bridge, looked out over his people. The sense of isolation he had felt in the Necrit expanse was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Nolan grabbed a blanket and sank into the holographic captain's chair on the bridge. He let out a long, weary sigh, feeling the tension of the day slowly ebb away. The bridge, oddly silent in its monolithic bulk. "Alara, are you there?" His voice was barely above a whisper, heavy with exhaustion. Always. Ilara's voice was clear and steady through the comms, emanating from the bridge of one of the ships near the ringworld. Nolan closed his eyes, letting the sound of her voice wash over him. "Thank you," was all he managed to say. His words simple but laden with a depth of gratitude that went beyond their brevity. His eyelids grew heavy, and he felt sleep pulling him under. From her ship, Ilara watched him through the screen, her eyes softening. "I love you," she said out loud, but the comm was off. She knew he couldn't hear her, but the words needed to be said aloud, if only for herself. She gazed out at the surface of the ringworld, where the immense silhouette of the Havoc was just visible, a dark guardian against the stressors of the past. Nolan drifted into sleep, a faint smile playing on his lips. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of belonging, a warmth that he had long forgotten. The next day, Nolan squints in the eternal midday light and shakes off the sleep as he scuffles his way past a temporary shelter. To his astonishment, the feast continues, and more Neos beam to the surface. Small buildings and tents have been erected, several ships have landed, and hundreds of people mill about chatting and rushing around the festivities. A small city had built up around the Havoc overnight. "I sent word to everyone to let them know we're here," says Ilara, approaching from the side. "We're going to have a tough time getting them back to work after hanging out at the vacation house." Nolan, always struck by Ilara's beauty, looked at her somewhat stunned. He pulls her close, embracing her fully, holding her tight with his eyes closed. He breathes her in, and Ilara melts into him. As they begin to separate, Nolan offers a soft smile, which Ilara meets with her gaze. He kisses her. For a moment she looks surprised, but then they kiss deeply, letting 4 centuries of isolation and heartache drift away. A couple of Neos passing by. "You see, I told you, they've been making out in the Havoc for 400 years. A first kiss interrupted by laughter. Can't be a bad thing.